Okay, cool. We're going to get going. So, hello, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking about lots of fun compensation stuff with me and Liz. So Liz is going to get us going. So, I'm going to let her share her screen and we'll get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Brendan. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen now. There we go. All right. So thank you all for joining this session. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have either met myself or Brendan at least one time before. But we think this presentation is going to be really helpful just to kind of talk through compensation, what it is that we're doing day to day, some of like the higher level projects that we work on, just in an attempt to kind of demystify compensation, because we know that it can be a little bit of a mystery as to what we're doing day to day, what the reviews look like, how we're looking at the market as well. So I'm going to be taking the first half, and then Brendan will follow up with a second half that's a little bit more School of Medicine specific. But let us know if you have any questions. We do have some ground rules. I'm sure many of you are familiar with these rules, but just as a reminder, questions will be answered periodically. If you would like to raise your hand and get on the microphone, feel free to, but please save that for the allotted question slides. We ask that you're present during this. There's a lot of really great information, but there's also a lot of information. So if you need some time to digest it or you want to look it over again, we are going to make this available on the School of Medicine's intranet site. And if people have questions that include some names or certain confidential information, we do ask that it remains confidential. As for questions, we really have a few methods for how you can ask questions during this time. One is asking in the chat. You can do that at any time, and then we'll just address those questions during the Q&A slides. You can use your microphone as well. You can also message myself or Brendan privately, just using the chat function right above your chat message. You can see where it says to, and the default is everyone. You can just select me or Brendan. Or you can email us at any time, whether that's later today or it's months from now. Feel free, if you have any questions, to let us know. We will include our emails at the end of the presentation. So for a quick agenda, I'm going to be talking more about like central compensation as a whole and really talking about it on a campus-wide level. I'll briefly introduce you to our compensation teams and define our roles a little bit. And then I'll talk about compensation goals that we have as a campus, which includes some external focus elements and some internal focus elements. We'll talk through a little bit on how to submit compensation requests to me or Brendan. And then we'll talk a little bit about some tools that you can use outside of base pay. And then Brendan will do a more School of Medicine specific part of the presentation where he'll talk through some pre-hire mechanics, talk through the School of Medicine compensation model and the methodology that's used for that model, going over some staff salary approvals, best practices, promotions, and then finishing off with some faculty salary setting. We will include question slides throughout the presentation and then again at the very end. So if you ask a question in the middle of the presentation and we believe the answer is going to come in future slides, we might defer your question towards further on, but definitely by the end of the presentation, we'll make sure all of your questions are answered. So just going to start with the campus central compensation section. A brief introduction to our team. So on the central compensation staff, it is myself and Flory. She's the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Talent Acquisition Compensation HCM, and I am a Principal Compensation Consultant, and I've been with CU for about 3.5 years now. And then the School of Medicine compensation team consists of Wumi, Brendan, and Deanna. You all have probably interacted with them at one point or another, but they're also a really great team. One question that we get pretty frequently is what's the difference between the central compensation team and the School of Medicine compensation team? Who's reviewing what and why? So we did want to kind of break down what that process looks like. So for School of Medicine, they are responsible for doing the reviews and the approvals for research services under these 3 subfamilies: the clinical sciences, laboratory sciences, and information sciences. And they also do the salary reviews for community practice, all of the community practice roles, and other specialty areas. So that includes the artificial intelligence group, which I believe is in biomed, though there might be a few other departments, and then healthcare jobs within ClinImmune. Any other university staff job within School of Medicine or across campus and other schools and departments do route to central compensation. So that includes jobs that are in like the business services job family, research services that are under post awards, roles like that. If you aren't sure about which team your request should go to, don't worry. We are there to really help make sure that requests are routed correctly, as well as the classification and talent acquisition team are working on that. So there is some elements in our smart sheet forms that are supposed to route things to the correct team, but all of us are always checking to make sure that it routes properly. So you can always reach out to us if you have questions about who is reviewing what, or you can just rely on our teams to make sure the correct team is routing or is reviewing and approving the request. So there's really two major reasons why School of Medicine reviews certain requests and why Central Compensation reviews other requests. The first reason is that School of Medicine is able to review requests where jobs that are mainly within School of Medicine are, let me restart that sentence. So School of Medicine reviews requests where most of the people that are in that job classification are located within School of Medicine. So for example, with research services, clinical sciences, 90 to 95% of the employee population on campus in that classification are within School of Medicine. So for School of Medicine doing an equity review, they have basically the vast majority, if not all, of the salary data available to them. And so they can do an equity review without issue. Versus reviews that are in other jobs, like let's say an IT role or an academic services role, there are really jobs located all over campus. And so those are requiring a larger review and really looking at more data across campus to ensure that equity is still being perpetuated. So that's the primary reason. The second reason is also just to ensure that the team that's reviewing your request really has a deeper knowledge and understanding of the role. So a good example of that is community practice. Brendan, Deanna, and Wumi are all very knowledgeable in community practice and the needs of that area. And so them reviewing it, you're really going to make sure that that team has a really good understanding of those roles in that market. So in summary, School of Medicine reviews some, Central Compensation reviews others, and it's really just to make sure that your positions are well understood by the team that's reviewing the requests. And we're making sure that the equity scope is appropriate based off of where that job is across campus. Regardless of which compensation team is reviewing your request, we can ensure that we are doing an equity review based off of the candidate or the employee's qualifications. So I'll get into that a little bit later on, and Brendan will as well, as to what an equity review really looks like on both of our teams. But we can just ensure you that equity is being monitored during any salary review. So talking about compensation's primary goals for staff, there's really two main goals. One is external, really talking about if we're being competitive with the market. And then the second component is more internal focused, and that's about creating and maintaining internal equity. So we're going to start by talking about market competitiveness a little bit. But I do want to do a side note on classified staff because their compensation process is done really through the state. So the state develops the salary ranges for classified staff, and they've implemented the step pay program as of July 1st of last year, where employees are slotted into their salary range based off of their time and job series within the classified system. So that's mandatory, and it's a mandatory minimum. We can offer more than STEP if it's internally equitable on campus, but we have to at least pay that STEP pay. And for July 1st up ahead, right now, we know what's proposed by the state. It isn't formally approved until the governor signs the long bill, which usually occurs in late May. But right now, the proposal is a 2.5% COLA increase for all employees hired on or before June 30th of this year. COLA stands for cost of living adjustment. That is going to replace the across the board increase language. So it's the same idea that all employees will receive that 2.5%, but instead of ATB language, it will now be referred to as COLA. Each employee also will have their step updated based off of their time in series as of June 30th, 2025. That change occurs on July 1st. So if applicable, an employee might receive a step increase if they have a certain step that permits the increase. Others won't see a step increase. It just depends on how many time in series years they have. The other proposal is that the range structure for classified staff is expected to increase by 2%. So again, all of that has been decided upon by the state. We'll still see if that's approved and keep you all posted. For alternate funded staff, they are kind of a hybrid between university staff and classified staff in the sense that they are using the state ranges, but they are not using STEP to determine pay. We're just doing our equity reviews, which again, we'll get into later on. And they do use the same merit methodology as university staff. School of Medicine has implemented some unique compensation codes for alternate funded staff as of later in 2024. So those are still pretty new, but those are kind of the only exception. Most alternate funded don't have unique compensation codes. For university staff, the way that we ensure we're being market competitive is that we are looking at the salary ranges and then updating them on a periodic basis. We tend to market match the director and the senior professional levels, and every other level is established through a formula. And we use about a dozen survey sources. Our most common ones are Coupa, PayScale, Mercer, and Employers Council. Because really our target industries that we're trying to align ourselves with are education, government, and nonprofit. Those are the industries that have been determined are industries according to senior leadership. But we also like to pull some local and regional data because Denver is a hot market. So we want to make sure that we're also competing locally. We updated the salary ranges to be effective on April 1st for this coming fiscal year. So the salary setting spreadsheets that departments received include those ranges. If you're going to post new jobs, they will utilize the fiscal year 26 ranges. And in any compensation review after April 1st, Brendan and I are ensuring that no employee is paid below the minimum of the new salary ranges. For most of our university staff ranges this year, we preserved the data, meaning the ranges did not change from last year to this year. However, we did update the healthcare ranges, the IT ranges, and some of the research services ranges, which include the clinical sciences, the laboratory research, and the informational sciences group. We did note which ones were updated and which ones were preserved on the master salary range document that's on our website. But if you do have questions, again, feel free to let Brendan or me know. And we do utilize the classifications for our salary ranges. And that's part of why classifications are so important. And so we do want to do a little bit of an overview of what our staff classification structure looks like. So this pyramid is a really great visual. The classification consists of a job family, a subfunction, and a level or a job code. The idea of the whole classification is it should align jobs that fit together based off of the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are required for that position. It represents a great career path from lowest to highest. And it helps us create market ranges that are competitive based off of the work that's being performed, which helps in turn make sure that we're being equitable across campus. So I'm going to briefly just break down those three components of classification. So that first base of the pyramid is job family. And that is really like a wide group of jobs that involve similar work or require similar training, skills, knowledge, and experience. Job families are set at the system level, so they are not Anschutz campus specific. And there's about 20 job families within our classification system. 15 are the ones that we tend to use on our campus more regularly. And you've probably heard a lot of them, but they're like academic services, HR, healthcare, IT, research services, and so on. Subfunctions is the next level of that pyramid, and that is a smaller group of jobs within a larger job family that describe the actual functions of that role. And so we have almost 120 subfunctions across the 20 job families, and those continue to grow year by year. So a good example of this is under the job family research services. 3 examples of subfamilies are clinical sciences, post awards, and regulatory compliance. So all of those roles fit into research services, but clinical sciences is very different than post awards and is very different from regulatory compliance. And sometimes in that case as well, they're paid very differently in the market. And so that's why it can be really valuable to have sub-functions, is that we're really capturing the market more closely, and we're making sure that clinical science employees aren't necessarily being compared to post awards when it comes to equity. The last level of the pyramid, the top, is the level or the job code, and that indicates the general experience that's required to fill the position at a certain level. So this is for university professional staff, and this is kind of a nice visual to show you the different levels. And this will determine the type of work they're doing, the level of independence that they have day to day, and the scope of the duties that are performed, as well as, again, the minimum qualifications around experience for each level. So the entry level is the lowest level of professional university staff, and that just requires a bachelor's degree. There is no experience minimum qualification. The senior level is a bachelor's degree and 2 years of professional relevant experience, and so on and so forth. So as you go through the levels, generally it tends to require more experience, and usually the independence level and the scope of the duties become greater and more complex. So when you put those three components of that pyramid together, the job family, the subfunction, and the job code, that's what's going to give you the unique compensation code. They're typically 8 characters long. Some of the alternate funded ones are a bit longer, but the general idea is when you see that code, it should give you a lot of information about the role itself. So a good example is this one here, the RSCR 2484. So RS is the job family, that's research services. CR is the subfamily, and that's clinical sciences. And 2484 is the job code or the level, and that is the manager level. So we know that this is a in total research services clinical sciences manager, and we can look at that unique compensation code across campus or within School of Medicine to determine what an equitable salary would be. And again, we'll get into the equity reviews in a moment. And the end goal, there's a lot of benefits to having this classification component for the talent acquisition and classification teams, including knowing the employment group, the qualifications that should be required, and FLSA status. But on the compensation side as well, this helps us determine the market and really what we need to do to be market competitive. And it also helps us in our equity reviews, making sure that people performing very similar work, if not the same work, are being paid equitably. So last note about unique compensation codes is that some subfamilies or unique comp codes have their own range, while others are part of an overall range. This is just depending on how they're paid out in the market. So in this little chart at the bottom of the slide, the ones highlighted in green are ones that have their own separate salary range. And that's just because they're paid pretty uniquely in the market. And so we wanted to make sure that we had a really precise range for that group. Versus the one in white, the animal management, is one that is a part of the research services overall range. It's still market matched, so we're still looking at market matches and market data, but we find that a general range really captures the group's market. So certain job families have only 2 or 3 subfamilies in their overall range, like research services. But IT, for example, has at least 7 or 8 unique compensation codes within their overall range. And again, that's just because that general range captures that group's market. So when we're looking at equity, we're still going to really hone into that unique compensation code, but we don't necessarily need a specific or separate range for that subfamily. So this is the first time for questions. Are there any questions right now? I can double check the chat as well.
We did have one from Danielle.
Okay.
She said it could be more towards the end, but we can ask it now. Who can she reach out to about advice for temp positions that they're unsure of for a fair and equitable salary range for the job duties?
That's a good question. So I know that HR Ops does help with the temporary postings. If the temporary hourly rate is going to be proposed at or above $50 an hour, they tend to route those to central compensation to double check. So you could always reach out to our compensation teams or to HR Ops. I also recommend that you kind of look at the job description and see where you would align it. You can even ask your classification consultant how they would align it to a university staff role. And you can kind of align it to, for example, if you find it's similar to a laboratory research role at the professional level, that you can use that salary range to kind of help direct where you think that individual should fall. So there's a few resources you can use, but if you have questions about that, you can always reach out to compensation.
And then we have a question from Sheldon. Are benefit calculations also included as part of the market research?
They are not when it comes to the overall salary ranges. I'm not sure, Brendan, if School of Medicine is specifically looking at that, but from the central compensation side, we don't do benefit market reviews. The system office at CU that's doing benefits, I believe they look more at the market elements or at the benefit elements. We're just really looking at the total cash compensation, the base salary.
Yeah, and we do the same thing for an SMHR as well.
Awesome. Okay. I think I see one
And then we
more.
have one, yeah, we have one more. While analyzing research services, looks like lab salaries, how do university salary compare to CHCO salary? Do you take that to consideration? So I can take that one, Liz. We do take that into consideration. When we're looking at, we call them competitors, we see what they're paying at, seeing what they're paying with similar roles. And then what we do is we try to match what they're paying. Children's generally pays higher. So typically you'll see a children's job a little bit higher than ours, but we look at all of our competitors, not just children's, when determining what those ranges are.
Yeah, thank you, Brendan. Okay, so I think I'm going to continue with the next part of the presentation. There are other opportunities for questions, so if you have any come up from things I've gone over previously or moving forward, feel free to put them in the chat. So we did talk through market competitiveness, but the next part is the second element of our primary goals on compensations team, and that's really the internal focus and talking about being equitable across campus and making sure we're creating equities and we're maintaining equities moving forward. So every time compensation does a salary review, we're looking at internal equity. It's conducted typically based on the classification, meaning that you need compensation code that tells us the job family, the subfamily, and the job level, because that is essentially the peers that that individual will have or would have. We can look specifically within a department because, of course, department equity is very important, but we really try to also look across campus, and that is always conducted and considered because we want to make sure campus data aligns. That being said, of course, there's some variation in maybe scope and complexity in different departments, so we do consider that as well. And the primary thing that we need to do first is collect that employer candidate's qualifications. So that's why we always request a job description and that individual's resume, because those are really the two resources we need to determine that individual's qualifications. When we look at the job description, we're looking at the minimum qualifications for the role and the job duties to determine the individual's total relevant qualifications. And we capture their education, which is their highest relevant degree that's obtained, and then their relevant professional external experience and their relevant professional internal experience to determine their total relevant qualifications. School of Medicine calls this TQS, so you may have heard of that term before. Brendan will get more into the TQS side of things later on in the presentation, but just as a very brief snapshot of it for now, education is counted in terms of the years it would take to complete that degree. So a bachelor's degree is typically 4 full-time years. So if somebody has a bachelor's degree, they will receive a 4. If they have an associate's degree, they'll receive a 2, and so on. For experience, we do count it in terms of months because 13 months can be very different than 23 months. But we do put it into an annual format. So for example, here, if somebody has 18 months of experience, that's 1.5 years. And we do prorate based off of experiences percent of time. So if somebody is working 50% FTE for a year, we're going to count 6 months because that would be what their full-time experience would calculate to. We do only calculate or count professional level experience for professional level positions. So we also keep that in mind as we're doing our review. And again, we're only looking at relevant experience because we really want to make sure that we're capturing the experience an individual has that's relevant to the role that they either are being promoted into or you'd like to offer them. So the TQS is essentially just totaling those values together. So if somebody has a bachelor's and a year and a half of experience, that would come out to 5.5 because the bachelor's is 4 plus the year and a half. A higher TQS tends to mean that a higher salary will be approved for an individual because, again, with equity, the idea is just that we're trying to compensate individuals highly when they have more education and experience compared to somebody that has less education and experience. School of Medicine has that TQS model to really help with that. So more to come on that in the future. So talking about how TQS really drives compensation approval, we both utilize the model. We both make sure that we're looking at it and seeing what the TQS model would recommend. However, School of Medicine tends to use it a bit more than the central compensation side does. We tend to look on the central side with a lot of different considerations. We do use the TQS model, but we're really looking at just pure data as well, looking at it across campus, looking at it within the department. And our goal is to really try to approve a range for you all that's designed to give the hiring manager flexibility. Just so that way, you know, we can still be equitable, but we can offer you some wiggle room as you're trying to negotiate with a candidate or an employee. And if we can't achieve the salary range or rate that you are hoping for, we do try to provide additional information as to why that range came out as it did. So maybe there is a equity issue that we're seeing, or there's a budget limitation that you have that we have questions about. We will work with you on that. School of Medicine, again, follows a pretty similar process. They are looking at equity as well, but they are looking at that TQS model, and that is really helping drive the range. Brendan can get into more specifics in a moment, but some of their roles within School of Medicine might be a little bit more strict in the approvals than central compensation would be, just based off of the nature of the roles. And that the TQS model is really designed to help create consistent equity approvals over time. So again, I think Brendan will talk a bit more on this piece in a moment, but just for your own knowledge at this point, that the TQS model is considered across both teams, but for central compensation, it tends to be a little bit more of a data point in the overall big picture, where with School of Medicine, sometimes it is more largely considered. So that's really how we're creating and maintaining internal equity. And again, we do those equity reviews in any compensation review. So whether it's a new hire request, it's an in-range adjustment, a promotion, classification change, we are making sure we're collecting that individual's relevant education and experience, and we're comparing it to the peers across campus or within School of Medicine specifically to determine what an appropriate salary range would be. There are some elements that's important noting as well, because these different bullet points that I have here are justified during certain actions. So what I mean by that is a new hire is, of course, if you have somebody, a final candidate you'd like to offer a position to. A promotion or a natural progression typically is seen when a job family and a subfamily will stay the same, but the employee is growing out of the role into a higher level. So maybe they have more independence, higher critical thinking skills, they meet the minimum requirements for the next level up. We can consider a natural progression or a promotion. An in-range adjustment should be submitted when substantive changes to the job description occur, but it doesn't impact the position's classification. So sometimes that is that certain duties have been added to the role just based off of the organization's needs or the department's needs, but the person's not actually going to move to a higher level or a different classification. For an equity review, that can be submitted by the employee themselves, the department, or HR if there's a belief that an inequity currently exists. Those are typically sent to Brendan or myself through email. They can be submitted in the transaction center as well with your classification consultant. Either way is fine, but we do like that they get routed to us because sometimes in compensation we have questions for you or we need additional context. So sometimes just sending us an email can be the best way to have that conversation, and we can send you some recommendations or findings that we have. There can also be classification changes where the duties of the role change significantly, which result in a change in job code, title, or level. So a good example of this might be like a business services role that's going to become much heavier in IT. And so it actually is now needs to be an IT position. We do review those in compensation just to make sure that the individual's salary is within their new classification salary range and their salary is equitable with their new group of peers. All of this to say that we are currently still under the hiring chill that's effective March 21st. So any job postings or salary changes need to be approved by senior leadership to move forward until further notice. And for promotions as well, School of Medicine has their promotional freeze that occurs from May 1st to July 31st. So that is also coming up. And then how you can submit requests. Many of you have probably submitted a request before, or you're familiar with a business partner doing this on your behalf. But for pre-offers, we have a step 1 smart sheet. We just had an optimization project that went live last month. And the idea was we just wanted to streamline the step 1 process for you all. So you have to submit less information to us because we can already pull it from the transaction center when you had requested the posting. The business partner should submit the step 1 in Smartsheet. It will route to the recruiter to ensure that the candidate meets minimum qualifications for the position, and then it will be routed to compensation, either myself or Brendan, for our review and approval. If you have an open rank position, we recommend and really would hugely appreciate if a business partner could identify the final rank before submitting it in step 1 so the recruiter can confirm the level. Sometimes an individual meets, let's say, the senior professional level, but the department only wants to hire at the intermediate level. That's why it's helpful for us to know what final rank you've decided on, so that way we can really move forward as quickly as possible and as correctly as possible. For salary adjustments or promotions, those are done through the transaction center. So that transaction center went live a little over a year ago. And with that process, same idea that the business partner submits the request, but the classification consultant will be the one that reviews that request first, just to make sure that the job description looks good, the changes are appropriate and may justify a salary adjustment or at least a salary review. And then it gets routed to compensation, again, either myself or Brendan, depending on the role, and we will do our salary approval. For new hires, compensations approvals go straight to the business partner, versus for salary adjustments and promotions, our approvals route to classification. And then classification will be in touch with the business partner to provide next steps and help with addendum letters. So if the approval comes back and it's not what you expected, whether you were hoping for a higher salary or you weren't really sure what to expect and you have questions about the approval you received, you can always email us with questions. You can also request a re-review from compensation on the Smartsheet approval email that you receive. It provides the contact of the compensation analyst that reviewed the request. So it will tell you if it went to Brendan or School of Medicine, or if it went to Central Compensation or myself. Or you can always just reach out to either of us and we'll make sure it gets to the correct person. It's always helpful if in your email you can provide some additional justification or context into your request, because sometimes there are additional factors outside of the resume that you learned in the interview, or maybe in the cover letter that was particularly important to the department. Whatever the case may be, having that additional context and justification from you all can potentially change the approval. But sometimes there are cases where just equity doesn't permit a higher approval, and we really are kind of stuck with the original approval. In that case, there are non-based tools that you can utilize. Primarily a recruitment incentive is a really great one. That is only for external candidates, so people outside of CU. The guidelines for amounts specifically for School of Medicine employees are on the intranet site, and essentially it's automatic approval up to a certain amount depending on the level of the role. And we always recommend that non-base incentives should have a payback period. Typically, people tend to do a year, maybe 2 years, depending on the level of the role. But that language will be included in the offer letter, which classification can absolutely help you with, or your recruiter. And the idea is that it will say to the employee or the candidate that we can offer a non-base recruitment incentive of X amount, and that if you leave prior to 1 year of service, you will need to pay back that incentive amount. So it's really, it's a great tool because not only does it help actually attract the candidate, but it might even help retain them in that year or two of service, which sometimes is all you need to even retain them for even longer. So I recommend that tool if you have an external candidate and the approval maybe isn't quite what you hoped it would be. That can really help you get a higher total compensation amount. Okay, so any other questions? I think I do see a couple in the chat.
Yes, there's a few in the chat. First one's from Abigail. For research services positions, does student experience count towards their salary TQS? So I can answer it from SOMHR, and then if you want to answer it from Central HR, cool. So for undergrad experience, we typically don't count that because they're already getting 4 points for their bachelor's degree, and we don't want to double count experience, and that student work is going towards them getting their bachelor's, and it's also not a full-time role, so it's not something we'd want to give full credit for. If it's student like grad research assistant work, we'll generally give half credit, and that's because it's post-bachelor's. So usually for our professional roles, we count post-bachelor's experience. So since that's post-bachelor's, we want to give half credit, but again, it's usually not full-time, so we don't want to give full credit, and they're getting an additional 2 points for having that master's, so we don't want to double dip there either.
Exactly. Yeah, and same thing on the central comp side.
Cool. Next question is from Oscar. Do professional certifications have any impact on the TQS score, such as a SHRM certification?
So for the TQS score, no, because it isn't really education. It is kind of in a way, but we really only look at actual degrees when it comes to the TQS score. But we do look at it if it's a preferred qualification that was on the job description or the job posting. We can take that into consideration and kind of adjust the approval on that. So even though it's not really part of the TQS score, it is something that we still consider.
Cool. And then same for SMHR, we don't really count certifications toward the TQS. Next question is from Ashley Prout. It's similar to Abigail's. Is college experience and work experience weighed equally in the TQS score, or does one carry more weight than other? So again, we don't really count college roles, so it wouldn't be considered equivalent for that.
Mm-hmm.
And then what is the typical turnaround time for comp request approvals to be sent back to the HR rep?
Yeah, so on the central compensation side, once we have all the information we need, it's within 2 business days at the most. It's typically within 24 hours. Sometimes there's a little bit of a delay because we have a question for you, or we might need some additional documentation. So that can sometimes delay the turnaround time. But as long as all the information is there, once we have it, we can turn it around for you within 24 hours.
And then same for us. We usually shoot within 24 to 48 hours on when it shows up.
Okay.
Next question is from Danielle. Can the department choose not to pursue being paid back? I think that's referring to the recruitment and payback period.
So we really strongly recommend that it should be used. I think if you want to offer that, I would recommend reaching out to the compensation team that's responsible for that review. So if it's one of like those research services or community practice roles, I would contact Brendan. And if it's a different role, like in academic services, HR, contact me and we can kind of explore that with you. But we really would strongly recommend it. So we would need some context as to why you wouldn't want to pursue a payback period.
Well, and yeah, I would say usually it should pay it back. It's in their letter of offer. I believe there's language where you can do a prorated amount. So let's say it's a 2-year buyback. They last like a year. It could be you pay back 2,000 instead of like 4,000 is another option to kind of look at if you don't want to have to make them pay back that full amount.
Yeah, that's a great point. There even is an option as well that you could do, like, let's say it's a 2K total payment. You could do 1K upon hire and then another 1K 1 year of service. So there are some flexibility options there. But yeah, I think having like a payback option or something like that that's going to help attract and retain the individual is really a valuable thing.
Yes, and I believe Deanna, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the longest we can go for a buyback is 3 years. Yeah,
Yes.
3 years. We can't go anything farther than the 3-year buyback payback.
That's due to IRS regulations. And I think mostly where I'm just curious with that is where the letter of offer has already had that in there. And then for one reason or another, the candidate didn't work out and the department just wants to let it go. Um, how appropriate that is.
So like if they, just to make sure I understand that if they get a second candidate after the first candidate has withdrawn or declined the offer, they no longer want to provide that incentive. Is that right?
No, that they've worked for us already for like 6 months or something, and it really didn't work out. Extremely so on both ends, and they don't want the drama of pursuing getting the money back.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I would say we should talk offline about it too to get just a little bit more information about it and see what options we have. So yeah, I'd say let's touch base on that offline.
Thank
That'd be
you.
great. Yeah, thank you.
The next question is 10K max you can offer for recruitment incentive. It depends on the role. So based on the level, it's a certain amount. So I believe up to intermediate, it's 2,000. Senior to principal is 4,000. We have a guide on the internet site, and then I'll have Malia include it with the monthly email as well. So you can see what those uh, ranges or pre-approved amounts are for recruitment incentives.
Perfect.
And then our next question is from Jean. What about credit for professional roles where the candidate may have worked full-time in a professional role for many years before getting their bachelor's degree?
So I would say in that case, it just kind of depends on the work that they were performing. So if they were performing professional work prior to their bachelor's degree and it's relevant to the role, we could count that. If it's though really paraprofessional work, like maybe they were in a law office, but they were doing filing and answering phone calls, we may not really consider that relevant or professional level. So it kind of depends on the experience that they had. But if it is professional and relevant, we would be able to count that.
And SOMHR does the same when looking at that. And then it looks like Makidra added in the recruitment incentive guideline.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Makidra.
Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, and again, if you have any other questions come through as you're kind of digesting the material, or again, whether it's today or a year from now, if you have questions, you can always email myself or Brendan. This next portion is Brendan's going to present on. It's more School of Medicine compensation specific. I'm still going to remain in Zoom so I can answer more questions as they come through. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen so Brendan can go ahead and share his screen. But thank you all.
Yes, thank you, Liz, for presenting. It's always good to see you. Me and Liz talk, I feel like at least twice a week. So it's always good to see her.
Yep, you too, Brendan.
And then a lot of stuff I'm about to go over, there is some overlap with what Liz just presented on. So I'm going to kind of go over that stuff a little bit faster. If you need me to repeat it, I'm happy to. And then the rest of it will be more SOM specific. So first we'll do some pre-hire salary mechanics, our SOM compensation model and methodology. And then I'll go over how SOM staff salary approvals are completed and just some best practices with the ranges you get. And then just tips for salary offers. And then I'm going to do just a quick touch base on what promotions and their requirements are. And then we have a section over faculty salary setting and administrative stipends. So for just pre-hire salary reviews, as Liz said, please submit that to the Central HR Transaction Center request form, and then TAC will submit it to the correct person on who should be reviewing it. Make sure you're including that job description and resume. Org charts are also very helpful, especially when you're hiring for like a manager, program manager type role. We like to see that org chart. And then the information is routed via Smartsheets to either Central HR or SOMHR. And then again, for SOMHR, we oversee all community practice positions, the research services roles that are clinical, lab, and information sciences, the ITI group, and then the healthcare group in Clinimmune. And then again, reviews typically take, we say 1 to 3 days. I try within 24 to 48 hours. But please remember that that process can take longer depending on time of year. And then also if there's certain things missing and we have to reach out to get that information, that'll also delay that process. So our SOM compensation model. So our model is designed to help establish consistent and equitable practices via an objective and formulaic approach. So first, our model is developed to assist appropriate placement of an individual based on their minimum qualifications for a job and then their personal qualifications. So that's where that TQS score that Liz had mentioned earlier comes into play. So we evaluate their relevant education and relevant years of experience to get that TQS. And then with our model, we use that TQS and give credit for every year of qualification above those minimum qualifications. So we're looking at that TQS, again, degrees, they're giving certain amounts. So associates 2, bachelor's 4, master's 6. If you have a PhD, I don't think we see them too often for staff roles, but a PhD is worth 8 points. And then for every year of relevant experience, they get an additional point. And then that TQS is mapped to the salary range for that role that they're looking at. And then employees whose qualifications align exactly with the minimum of the qualifications of that role is mapped to the minimum of that range. So an example is when you're hiring an entry-level person, the minimum TQS is a 4. And if you're hiring them and they have a TQS of a 4, their approval is going to be what that minimum of the range is. And then for each TQS point that they are above the minimum of the qualifications for that role, they go up 2.9412 percentiles within that salary range. So within the range, we have a min, mid, and max. We break up that range by 1 percentile. And then every point there above, they go in through the range 2.9412 percentiles. And I can break down more offline if you are more interested in learning in it. It can get kind of complicated, so I don't want to spend too much time fully breaking down how it fully moves. But if you're interested in that, let me know. So moving into our staff salary approvals, we have updated the spread of our candidate-based salary offer approvals that we provide. This was based on pilot project feedback and then just general feedback we received from our SOM community. And we've been implementing this since about August of last year. So what this does is the TQS calculation is still our anchor. And then the minimum you get is 2% below that TQS calculation, and the max is 5% above. And it does not exceed the minimum or maximum of that job code. So let's say, again, we're hiring someone that's like an entry, and they barely meet the min quals to be at that level. Their minimum isn't going to be 2% below because we don't offer below or above whatever specified range is. So that minimum would just be the minimum of the range and then 5% above that to help give you some flexibility. So this helps result in a much broader and approved candidate range, and it helps departments, it allows them to utilize more analytical-based decision-making. And then please remember not to defer automatically to either just giving them the min or the max that approved offer range. And then these next few slides, we'll kind of go over just some tips on how to use that range that you get. So some salary setting best practices. So some factors to consider, obviously the candidate qualifications, you want to ensure that they're meeting that minimum of whatever role you're trying to hire them in. You want to look at internal equity. So Liz looks at it from a campus-wide perspective, and then I'll look at it from a school perspective, depending on the role. And then the range we're giving you is saying this is what you can offer best equitably, either school-wide, campus-wide. We ask the departments to take a deeper dive into looking at others in similar roles, either within their department or within their unit or division, just so that way they can see like this person has the same TQS, so we should probably offer the same salary. So even though my range is 60 to 65, they both have a TQS of 11, and the person I have internally is making 62. I should probably offer the person 62 as well to stay equitable within that unit. Budget is also a factor. If you can't afford the 65, probably shouldn't be offering the 65. And then also remember, we do have a total compensation package. So what we give you is just the base salary, but we do have great benefits. We have our leave benefits. I'm sure you guys have heard the whole spiel, but make sure you point that out. Send our the total comp calculator that breaks that down too. Another thing you want to look at is this a role that's been hard to recruit for? And maybe that's a justification for why you'd offer them higher on the range. So let's say they both have a TQS of 11 and you want to give this person a little bit higher. Maybe it's because the role you're trying to fill has been hard to fill, or maybe they're bringing in a more specialized skill set that the other person doesn't have to help give justification for why we're going to offer maybe a little bit more. And then for roles that require supervision, you might want to also look at the years of management experience that person has, or maybe the number of direct reports as to why you'd want to offer a little bit higher on that range that you get. Then some best practices. just remember that new hire and promotional salaries must be established within that range. Again, candidates and employees that are just starting their career will most likely be in that first quarter of the salary range. And then employees that are being demoted or moving to a lower classification will generally mean a decrease in pay. And that's because they're going from a higher salary range and that higher UCC that Liz talked about earlier to a lower one. So since that salary range is lower, most likely means a pay decrease. And then lastly, employees making lateral movements will typically not receive any kind of additional compensation for moving. And that's because if it's a lateral move, they're doing a very similar role that they're already doing at that same level. And we try to avoid poaching and say like, hey, come to my department. I can pay you $10,000 more. That's the same role. That's not appropriate. So we try to avoid that where we can. And then just some additional staff salary tips. Again, make sure you're obtaining that candidate salary range from either SMHR or Central HR. You want to make sure you're building a strong rapport and relationship with the candidate. So what that means is you want to know the candidate's value. So make sure you're understanding their qualifications and the work they'd be doing within their within your unit. And then also make sure you're understanding the internal equity benchmarks and you know how their qualifications compare to others within your unit. And then also if the role has potential for career development or career growth possibilities, make sure the candidate is aware of that. I've seen a lot of people accept roles where maybe the salary isn't as high as they want it to be because they know they have room to grow. And if they do have room to grow, you'll likely be able to keep that candidate longer than having them leave within like a year or something like that. And then also be prepared to negotiate flexibly. And so you want to make sure you're ready to handle counteroffers. People are taught to ask for more money. So you should always be ready for them to ask for more, even if it sounds like a crazy amount. Sometimes people just ask just to see what they can get. So with that, make sure you're not starting the salary offer right away at the max of the approved candidate, the approved range, because if you're doing that, then you're already stuck in your one amount. And then you can always increase the offered amount after the initial offer for candidates who do not negotiate. So let's say, again, it's 60 to 65, you want to offer them about 64. You start with 62 and they go, cool, I'm going to take it. You can come back to them later and say, I've thought about it. I'm actually going to give you 64,000 instead. And you can move on with that. And then again, make sure you're discussing that entire total compensation package. We have great benefits. And then also if your department has additional perks that they can offer, make sure that is known as well. I think some departments have like a flyer they give people on like their first day saying, this is all the cool things we have. So if you have something like that or make something like that, that helps attract candidates as well. I think the next step I have is over promotions. Are there any other questions before I move on to that?
There's no questions currently in the chat.
Ooh. So types of promotions. Liz kind of touched on this already as well. So a promotion is just upward movement from one job level to another. It's based on qualifications and an increase in scope of job responsibilities. And this applies to all staff roles. So I only have entry through senior listed with the arrow. And that's just because entry through senior is more automatic in moving through levels. And then when you get to that principal and higher level, isn't always a guarantee. So I don't like to make it seem like, oh yeah, you can get all the way to the manager level, just because there's some roles that once they get to a certain mark, they can't go any higher. And then please also remember that the employee must meet the minimum qualifications of the new level at the time of the natural progression, and they're already demonstrating the mastery at that higher level. So if you're going to promote someone to a senior pro, let's say May 1st shouldn't be the first day that they're acting like a senior pro. They should already be performing at that senior level, and the promotion is the reward for them doing that type of work. And then a natural progression request should only advance one level and must be within the same job family. If you have someone that you think should be bumping up 2 levels, let us know. We're happy to discuss and see what the justification is for that. Sometimes I'll say yes, other times maybe not. It just kind of depends on why we're wanting them to hop 2 levels. And also if you're moving them up that fast, they're hitting their ceiling too fast, and then it might cause them to leave sooner than expected. And then it is recommended to wait 1 to 2 years before promoting them to that next level. And then the last 2 types of promotions are in-rank and then a promotion via search. In-rank is where they're taking on increased responsibilities, but not enough to justify moving to that next level. Sometimes it is better to do that in rank opposed to natural progression. And we mostly see those with like principal, pro, and higher. And that's again just because some roles aren't able to progress farther than that. So depending on the additional duties, though, we can look at an in rank and see what that would give us. And then this last one is promotion via search. So this means that they're moving into a new job and it has to be posted. And that's most likely because they're either moving into a different job family or they're moving into a higher level position that would not be considered a natural progression. A good way I try to determine that is if they're moving into this new role, does that cause a vacancy with their old role? If it does cause a vacancy, then we call that a job opportunity and it has to be posted. And then this slide is just some recommendations on requirements that can be used to show what needs to be promoted. Because what we look for is just to make sure that they're meeting the minimum qualifications and the job description matches what the specific level should be. Departments are encouraged to have their own criteria though, to help promote. A good example is if you want to approach like an intermediate, that they should be in the position for 15 to 18 months, and they should be having a performance review of about a 4. And then last note, salary setting for natural progressions and in-rank promotions. Salaries are determined the same way as they are for new hires. So we create the TQS score, we do our equity review. Again, we will do the same TQS calculation that you guys get for new hires, and you'll get that 5% below and 2% above. And then the last important thing I want to point out is there is no predetermined percentage increase for natural progressions or in-rank promotions. I know sometimes people think just because you're promoting, they need to get like a 10 to 15% increase. Sometimes that happens and it's great, depending on where their salary is currently at with and then the rank they're moving into. We can't guarantee that, so we don't like to promise a certain percentage and just encourage you guys not to give certain numbers when talking about promotions with employees. Any questions on staff salaries?
There's nothing in the chat at the moment, but we can always take a couple seconds. I know it's a lot of information to take in.
And if it's easier to come off a mute, you can do that too. I know sometimes it's easier to just talk than have to type. Well, if there's nothing, we're going to hop over into faculty items. So for faculty compensation, so there's no set scales right now for faculty. Some departments have developed scales and other consistent ways to evaluate candidates. We do ask that you use market data for your specialty. So the default is the AAMC benchmark, and it's also good to supplement other surveys with the AAMC. Some examples like Sullivan and Cotter or MGMA. I believe your DFAs have access to all those surveys as well. And then you can also look at other current postings from other organizations that are posting the same type of roles and kind of see what they're paying. And then please remember for both faculty and staff that we cannot ask about their current and previous compensation because it's against the law. And then you want to make sure you're considering experience since their degree and then the time in their actual rank, and then make sure you're evaluating for internal equity. And then one more slide, just kidding. And then also make sure you're using the correct BSI amounts. So updated BSI amounts come out each fiscal year. I believe we have the fiscal year 26 available on our intranet site. So what this means is if you're at an assistant professor or above position, they need to be paid at least the minimum of the amount that's listed. So your base M is the minimum amount required to be paid in that specific job code, and the base up would be the remainder of their regular salary. Make sure you're paying attention to those. I know when table uploads happen, sometimes those cause issues. So always make sure that the most up-to-date ones. And then when July 1 hits, I know the table helps update everyone to get to the correct base M amount. And then if they're not at a 1.0 FTE, these amounts will need to be prorated as well. And then these next slides are about Deanna's favorite topic, faculty admin stipends. So for new faculty admin positions and their associated stipends, please remember that they have to be posted on either the SOM intranet or CU Careers for at least 5 days, and a defensible search needs to be conducted. Also, these roles do require mission critical approval, so make sure you're getting that mission critical before submitting to the intranet smart sheet. Malia is double checking to make sure that the MC has been approved before we proceed with posting. And then upon completion of that search, send that search summary to either SOMHR or HR faculty request, depending on where you posted it. And then the posting will be taken down. And then please remember that we cannot backdate these stipends regardless of the justification. And that's because since we have to follow a posting, we can't backdate it prior to that posting because then it doesn't become a real search and it's not defensible. We're breaking more laws and we don't want to do that. And next is changes to existing faculty admin roles. So if the duties are changing, that does require a posting and you'll follow all the steps I just listed. If they're not changing, this does need, the change still needs, or if the duties aren't changing, the change still needs to happen in conjunction with the biannual salary setting process. So any change to stipends have to be effective on either January 1st or July 1st. And this next slide will kind of cover those steps. So if we're changing an existing stipend, make sure you draft an addendum letter and submit that to Faculty Affairs. And then in your submission, make sure you're describing the justification for the change. Faculty Affairs will review it. If it's approved, they route the addendum loop for you. And then once you get that fully signed loop back to you, make sure you submit a transaction in HCM. And again, these will need to be effective either January 1st or July 1st, as it will be it'll be happening at the same time as the labor planning and Table 1 process, but it's not part of the actual upload. So that's why you need to do a separate TBT to get the pay entered in. If you're ending a faculty admin role though, that can end at any time of the year. That doesn't have to be on January 1 or July 1. To end it, again, you'll just want to draft an addendum lieu, submit that change to Faculty Affairs, describe why it's ending. Once Faculty Affairs reviews it, they'll route that letter for you. And then again, once you get that fully signed letter, you can enter in the TBT and HCM. An important note is since most of these roles are now in their own position, instead of doing a decrease in pay, you'll just want to term whatever record that stipend is on. And then you can use that position number if you're reposting and hire whoever's going to be the replacement into that position number. And then just some notes on salary changes for faculty in general. So changes to the faculty compensation, including 2 admin stipends, can only be made during the biannual salary setting process. Again, effective January or July 1. It has to stay within the region's prescribed pool amount, and then any individual increase that's going to exceed that pool amount will require a justification. So typically it's 2 times the pool. So if the pool is 3%, anything equal to or greater than 6% requires a justification. If you have specific questions on the justification, reach out to SOM Finance and they can help you with that stuff. And then just as a best practice, make sure you're reviewing your unit's active admin stipends, at least biannually, in conjunction with the labor planning process. And this will just help you guys see if there's any current stipends that maybe shouldn't be active anymore or make any updates as needed. So moving forward, for admin stipends, you can create new positions as they arise. We have guidance here on the PowerPoint, and it's on our Anschutz site already. Departments will need to also identify additional salary support only positions that are not already carved out and create those positions. If you need help, please let SOMHR know. We can help get those made for you. We need working title, job code, speed type, the reports to position number, and then the FTE and the name of the incumbent. And then SOMHR is also working with OME to clarify faculty roles and determine the next steps. And then lastly, this is just the UCCs that have been created for the director and associate director positions. So when you're creating your positions, please look at what UCC would best fall in with whatever director or associate director role you're making, and then let SOMHR know what that UCC should be. And then after your position gets approved, we can add in that UCC for you. Right now, HRBPs don't have access to creating that. And that is everything we have. Are there any last minute questions?
I have a question. This is Mandy.
Yeah.
It's regarding the timing of an admin stipend in light of Table 1. So I've got someone that I need to start an admin stipend for. What timing do you recommend between now and July 1st? Like, how is that going to impact Table 1 if I do it?
Is it a brand new role?
It is.
It is. So for that one, you would post and then you can start it based on.
I've already done all that part. When did you say it can go into effect without messing
You
up
can,
table one?
you can start that anytime. So
Okay.
the stipends this year are not on the table. It's just the base M and the base sup that's on the table.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
But I have been getting quite a few questions on wanting to end stipends but keep the compensation the same. So there is a mechanism to do that. And Brendan had talked about that. And the instructions are on our intranet site. But so you would roll it into you basically are rolling it into the supplement. So you're adding that on the table one. So you're adding the $10,000 or whatever to the supplement to keep them at the same rate of pay. And then if that makes the raise over the 7%, they're gonna need to have a justification there, and then that will impact your pool. So if you have a bunch of those that you're trying to do, you may or may not be able to do that on your table one. You might have to spread it out. So we allow you to do that for July 1st and for January 1st.
Looks like we do have a question in the chat. Who determines what previous experience an applicant has qualifies as patient-client facing experiences? So depending on the role, we look at the min quals and see what those min quals are. And then based off of the resume and how they describe it, we take, I won't say guess, but we determine what we think should be appropriate. Once you get back that approval and you think the experience looks off, reach out to the appropriate approver. So usually myself or Liz, and we can let you know what we counted and what didn't count. And if there's something that wasn't counted, we can discuss on best steps going forward and if should be counted or not counted. Any other questions? Cool. Well, if not, you know where to find me and Liz. We're always happy to chat. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, everybody.